Hi, today we're talking about two films that came out, one in 1979 and one in 1980. Over the Edge came out in 1979, and My Bodyguard came out in 1980, and both films deal with adolescence during that time. And one of the films is a little more radical than the other, but both have a certain depth to them, and really affected me when I saw them as a child. Um, Over the Edge had a limited release when it came out and didn't really pick up popularity until later. It had a limited release because the Warriors and the Wanderers had come out that same year before this, in 1979, and each had incidences of stabbings and shootings and vandalism at the theaters because they dealt with gangs and crime and wild youth. So the producers decided to give it a limited release. Um, the but it's picked up cult status over time. So you want to give me your take on Over the Edge, Michael?
Well, Over the Edge uh, is an early film by Jonathan Kaplan, and he never did anything as radical again. You can see, just speaking technically first, you can see that uh, he's kind of green as a director. He spends a lot of time, and this happens in My Bodyguard too. He spends a lot of time filming people going from place to place,
Yeah.
and and uh, but the people are very interesting. The kids are kids. They are not being played by people in their 20s. You can see that. The kids are being played by kids. That's a very fresh thing. It is not, uh, for instance, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. A show I have respect for, by the way. We should talk about that sometime. But uh, and 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 they are in this designed community. I don't know how else to put it. The as the credits at the beginning credits, you're notified that this is a planned community. That's what they call it, and occurrences like this did take place in a planned community somewhere in the Midwest. Uh, but you're seeing kids who don't know what to do with themselves, and the society doesn't know what to do with them. Uh, they're white, almost completely white, and they seem to have anyway, two parents apiece. In terms of what we see of the parents, their parents have decent jobs, but the kids are I don't want to say the kids are lost because they're just kids, but they're moving. I don't mean just kids, you know what I'm saying. They're moving in a state of lostness. It seems that their community doesn't know what to do with them, and the larger society doesn't know what to do with them. Uh, how would you phrase that? How would you describe them?
Uh, I think they're being pulled in a lot of different directions, and I think that the parents, uh, I think that pop culture is a giant influence on them, and the promotion of drugs, and I mean all of the people that they're looking up to in pop culture are on drugs and advocating
Mm-hmm.
drugs, um, and they they kind of they don't look at any, like, the young men don't look at any of the males in their sphere as role models. Um,
Right.
and there's a lot of very subtle things in this movie, a lot of different factors in this movie, and nobody is really made out to be the bad guy. Even the cop is not like
Right.
he's not a bad guy. Like
Yeah. He's trying to be a good guy.
yeah, he's really trying to do his job and be firm and then weigh these other factors about
Hmm.
the economy of the community and investment in the community and these different power centers in the community and and how do you deal with these crazy kids that are
Hmm.
kind of just a product of this weird popular culture in a way that seems to like advocate just like debauchery and like your lower self.
Hmm.
How does he deal with this without being a dick? Without coming off
Right.
as a dick. I mean, those guys at the start, those guys, Vincent Spano shoots out the windshield of the cop car. I mean, that's not a good
That's a
thing.
startling scene. I mean,
Yeah.
because at first you don't know it's an air rifle.
Right. Yeah.
You know, uh, it looks like a rifle, and he shoots the window of that cop car, and it cracks the cop car.
Yeah.
The window, and I'd forgotten all about that, and I really gasped audibly. I went, "What?" and and then it's a chase, and the kids get away, and the cops don't know who did it, and it sets the tone of the whole movie. If you're going to do that, you're on the verge of doing anything.
Yeah. Yeah, and that I mean that kind of thing isn't an exaggeration for the kids of that time period. Like there was very radical activities being done by those teenagers at that time period. But
Yes.
and there's a whole subtle thing about the rules and the kind of ethics of this group of youth about
Hmm.
like they have their own set of rules about everything that they're working on and they're trying to be street smart but they're still really innocent and like
Yep.
the scene where the cop car windshield gets shot out and then the guys run away on the bikes and then they're walking down the main Matt Dillon and the other guy are walking down the sidewalk and they hide and then later on he says to him and it's something that probably just goes over everybody's head but he says to him we shouldn't have hidden we should have just kept walking down the sidewalk and talk to the
Yep.
cop. These are like
Yep.
little subtle things and then when he comes in when they're being interrogated by the cops and they're like like a kid never tells on a kid who tells on another kid is a dead kid but within that
Right.
in that scene they don't realize how they're telling on the other kids by the little things that
Hmm.
they're saying like he's like the cop says where'd you get that belt buckle and he tells him where he got the belt buckle and then later on that kid gets busted for hash like
Right. Right.
they snitch on each other without knowing that they're snitching on each other and when they should have just shut up the whole time type thing right and
Yep.
there's a lot of different that whole idea of the rules among this group of kids and them having their own little ecosystem that they kind of rule over
Hmm.
is an interesting part of the movie.
And that ecosystem, which is a good thing to call it, I think, that ecosystem is completely insulated from the adults. It's a completely different world. And the adults don't realize the power of it. Because in their generation, which would be my generation, uh, things were very different. It wasn't that the youth didn't have an ecosystem, but it was that youth culture was just being born. Uh, before about 1956, 57, there wasn't youth culture. Movies and products were not mass produced to the youth. And so those parents really, even though they were the first youth culture, they were still about, if they were my age, they were about 10, 12 when it started to be a youth culture. So they were out of high school before it really got going. And they don't know how to relate to it. It's another language. It's as though their children are speaking a different language and have a completely different set of inner rules than the parents tried to impart to them. Would you say that that's accurate?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at your media role models, I mean, Audie Murphy and John Wayne and
Mm-hmm.
guys like that, and this generation in this movie, and for me, I'm kind of like in between. These guys are older than me, but for me, it was like Jimi Hendrix and Jim Morrison and guys like
Mm-hmm.
that, right? So it's just a totally different thing, and it creates this deception between the adolescents and the parents too, where they have an
Yes.
entirely separate life that they're hiding from their parents. All the drugs and everything are being hidden, um, and the frustration of the parents is really well done in this film,
Mm-hmm.
and the conflict it creates between his mother and his father, and but I think you're wrong about the all the kids having two parents in the movie too, because that's I think he's the only one that is really explicitly shown as having
Oh,
like a solid family life. Matt Dillon
that's
obviously
true.
has like a single mom. I think when they go to that drug dealer guy's kid's house, and they throw him in the pool or whatever, I think
Mm-hmm.
he's just got a single mom. Um, and that whole thing isn't really explored that much in this movie, except for the
Right.
Matt Dillon character a little bit, the family dissolution stuff. But that I thought that was really well done in this film as well. Again, there's so many aspects to this movie and so many different perspectives that you can look at it from, and even the the developer guy, like you even feel a
Mm-hmm.
little bit sad for the developer guy too. And these guys come from Texas and they're looking to build an industrial park or whatever, and he's trying to help the city or whatever, and everything falls apart because of the kids. And the funny thing about it is that, um, let's say that they had built the bowling alley and the movie theater and all that too. I mean,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that would have just been a magnet for drugs and vandalism, and like at the heart of it is this kind of just problem with these feral kids, and you have to really look at why are they feral like that, and there's so many different factors in that. um,
Why would you say?
I I think a lot of it has to do with pop culture for sure. I mean, that's a giant. I mean,
Uh-huh.
I would say 75% of it. And then just the kind of sterility and atomization of those planned communities, those suburban
Mm-hmm.
communities. I
Mm-hmm.
think that when there was all those communities in a city, like let's say New York
Yeah.
before Levittown, like compare those
Mm-hmm.
two things. You had these different communities of like Italians and Polish and black
Right. Right.
and Puerto Rican or whatever, and there was a little
And there was
those,
a lot of culture there in its own way.
right,
Each neighborhood had a lot of culture in its own way, whether it was consciously aware of it or not.
right, and even if those communities didn't interact that much together, they still understood that they had in common that they had their own communities, um, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and
Yes.
and also and then the influence of the church too, and people getting together at church, and and um, and so when they start suburbanization, all that kind of disappears, and
Right.
and and that kind of, I guess you could say, those ethnic communities kind of disappear, and
Hmm.
what do you hold on to? And I think at first in the 70s there was kind of like there was still a lot of people going to church, and they could get together, and let's say somebody's daughter needs a car for because she's going to college. They could
Hmm.
help each other out
Hmm.
with those kind of things, and just little
Yep.
things like that. Somebody could help somebody else get a job, or things like that. But when the church starts breaking down and people stop having that spiritual community, and those other little things like Rotary clubs and Lions clubs just become
Hmm.
things for
Hmm.
senior citizens. I think that has a giant impact on the kids, and people become more atomized, and they're not um, they're not going to like a main street and seeing all their neighbors there and getting
Right.
hugs from the women, and just feeling a warmth of community there, and like they're safe in that community, and also that they're being watched to see how they
Yep.
behave,
Yep.
right? So these kids just start taking cues from movies and TV shows, and pop idols, and looking to that, and so I think that has a giant effect on it. Yeah.
Yeah, and both idols that you mentioned, Jimi Hendrix and Jim Morrison, never made it out of their 20s.
Right. And Janis Joplin, and multiple
Janis Joplin.
others. Yeah.
Yeah. So there wasn't an adult kind of fixture, somebody you could look at who was in the pop culture but was adult.
Yeah.
Unlike when I was growing up, when, as you said, you had John Wayne and Audie Murphy, and you had, on another scale, you had Donna Reed and Dinah Shore.
Right.
I don't want to bring the whole sexism thing into it, obviously.
Well, there's
But
nothing
there
there
were
was
role
nothing
models, whether they were good ones or
there's nothing wrong with that.
whether they were.
There's nothing
Say it
wrong
again.
with June Cleaver. There's nothing
No,
wrong with
there's
Donna
nothing
Reed.
wrong.
There's
That's
nothing
true.
wrong with being
Yeah,
a homemaker. That's a
yeah,
natural thing to be, and that's something that should be respected. Um,
I
you want
agree.
to double your tax base and get more money for government? Yeah, throw a bunch of women into the work field, and I mean, it hasn't worked out that well for a lot of women that get into their 30s and 40s, and don't end up having kids and feel. I mean, there's a lot of drawbacks to that. And I think that that whole feminist thing of saying that being a mother is slavery, or being a homemaker is some kind of slavery. I mean, obviously women shouldn't be uh, confined into that role. I mean, that's just an obvious thing that, yeah, women should be able to go out and work and go to university and everything, but putting that in some kind of duality with being a homemaker, and downgrading that as some kind of slavery, or imprisonment, I mean, that was a big part of the 70s. That was a
Hmm.
giant
Hmm.
thing in the 70s, is trying to
It was.
portray family life as somehow uh, imprisoning. So I mean, you got to take that into into your thoughts when you're talking about this. But that last scene where all the parents are all together at that meeting, and everybody's frustrations are kind of being voiced in this meeting, right? Like the cops' frustrations, and the parents' frustrations, and the developers' frustrations,
Yep.
and
Yep.
all the different
And
perspectives are being seen. Yeah.
and it's also in a building that's kind of strangely modern, sort
Yeah.
of self-consciously modern.
Yeah.
It's a kind of dome,
Yeah.
uh, that just kind of shrieks modernity, for its own sake.
Right.
And and when the young people, we you got to realize it's been pushing half a century since I've seen this picture, and Jazz had never seen it, and the young people, and we're teachers. She's a principal of the school. She's been
Right.
26 years teaching. I spent 7 years teaching high school, and so we can really imagine ourselves in this meeting trying to make sense of things, and then suddenly you notice that, wait a minute, what are they doing out there? Oh, the children are locking us in. And realizing slowly, wait a minute, that they're a force out there. They're all out there. And we're just in here talking, but they are locking us in. Why are they doing that? And the sudden panic, I could see Jasmine, the principal, suddenly trying to do something, and me suddenly trying to support what she's doing, and so at that moment it was really personal. uh, uh, and then it goes unchecked. You really wonder at the end of the film, what's the next day going to be like?
Yeah. In that scene, I really like how the cop keeps trying to tell everybody everything's fine, but
Right.
he gets by the end of the scene, he's the exasperation. He's like angrily saying everything's all right. But,
Yeah, calm down. Everything's under control.
yeah, everything's under control. My favorite part of that scene is the kid running away with a tuba.
Yes.
What are you gonna do with the tuba, man? Yeah, yeah, but yeah, it's a good movie, and it's it it attained status long after it came out, I think.
That's interesting.
But
How do you think that happened?
because they only put it out in a limited release, like I said, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, but I did want to mention that the sound the score for it that I liked a lot, which was what did you think of the score?
I thought it was good. I thought it was. I thought it was a hard movie to score.
Yeah.
And I thought what was the name of the guy who scored it?
Saul Kaplan.
Saul Kaplan. So he was the father of the director.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was a very sympathetic score. It didn't get in the way, but you felt it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't the kind of score that I expected for it, like the kind of downplayed flute, and yeah, it was. I don't know. It kind of played to the. There's kind of like an underlying fatigue in these kids, like there's a,
very much so.
Like they're kind of like tired of all this conflict and everything that they're experiencing in their lives, and they're just kind of burnt out by all of it. Yeah, like they never really get a rest. And what you said about the scenes of people going back and forth, I think partly that was so it could show the landscape and show the kind of isolated character of the landscape.
It did do that very well.
Yeah, because it really juxtaposes the kind of bleak landscape that it's in, and also the beauty of that landscape. The kind of flowing wheat fields and sunsets and everything. There's some really beautiful scenes in it, but the kind of isolatedness of this planned community that's way out kind of in the sticks, you know, and how there's
Hmm.
nothing to do for the kids there. But yeah,
What really struck me also that I wanted to mention is the adults were taking no responsibility for the culture. They weren't representing anything. It was like these kids were not aware of their history, literature, music. It was like the adults gave it up to the schools to do everything. You didn't see a presence of that at all in the character of the adults, and that stood out for me. You didn't see. Well, in movies, you often don't see books in the home. Movies and TV, you rarely see books in the home. That kind of thing. There wasn't the presence of you of people growing up in a place that has a culture, if you look for it,
yeah,
which used to be the function of education. It was read and write and be able to do math, but it was also, even if what they were given was stilted and a lot of it downright false, it was a sense that there was a past, there is a present, there may be a future. There is a literature, there is a music, a body of it. I don't mean one, and that was completely absent in the environment of those children,
well,
and it somehow made everything younger.
yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting because this is kind of the beginning of the lack of community activities trend, where you're not having dances put on by the adults anymore. A big part of that is because of the vandalism and the drugs and everything. That was still big in the 70s. The having dances and different community get-togethers, but it faded over the 1980s for sure. One of the factors that wasn't addressed in this movie is the insurance industry, and
Right.
a lot of the like the skate parks that I went to as a kid closed down because of insurance issues, which is understandable. You know, a kid gets hurt or somebody gets assaulted or something like that, and then the parents sue, and it's a lot of money, and these things happen, right? And places have to close down, and that pretty much like shut down all the skate parks for like 15 years. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but there was in the 70s, like where I grew up in La Jolla at the married student housing, they were always having like potlucks and different like the adults were still, even though they were kind of subculturally liberal or whatever, like they people would still have these get-togethers and do things with the kids and have different activities for the kids that were really fun, and would cooperate together to do those things. And there was a communal atmosphere, which I don't think existed in that kind of waspy planned community atmosphere.
Right. Right.
Except
Right.
except with the church, and then they would have like dances at the high school that would hopefully go off all right. So
Yeah, when I was a kid in Brooklyn, they had confraternity dancers by the Catholic Church.
right, yeah,
Anybody they were called confraternity. I don't know why they were called confraternity, but I just remember that you went to a confraternity dance.
well, I assume confraternity
You
means brotherhood and people getting together, and sounds like that
Mhm.
kind of thing. But
Yeah.
you know, creating those community solidification and people interacting with each other and getting to know each other and keeping an eye on each other, and
Yes,
these
keeping an eye on
are
each other.
ways that you can get around. You might notice a kid being abused or being left out of the community, and you say, hey, like, would you like to do this, or and all that scaffolding around society kind of breaks down during this
Yes,
time. Like all those supports break down, um, and the kids, innocently enough, are a factor in that. Their behavior is a factor in that, um, and it's like they're innocent of the havoc that they're creating in a sense. So
yes,
it's a weird,
yes.
you know,
They're reacting. They're
yeah,
they're not initiating really. They're reacting.
right, yeah. So it's funny because no one's innocent in this whole situation.
That's true.
in this movie, like nobody's totally innocent. I mean, the kids are the most innocent of all because they don't really know what they're doing and they don't have a lot of life experience. But I like this movie a lot because it everybody's doing their best. Like there's no bad
Yes,
guy in this in this
yes.
movie. Like the
No,
lady
that
that
really is
runs
true.
lady that runs the community center, which her performance in this movie should be mentioned because it's really good. Is doing her best. The cop's doing his best. The car dealership guy's doing his best. The developer guy is doing his best. The investors from Texas are doing their best. It's so there's no bad guy in the movie really. And that's a pretty cool thing about it. Yeah.
Yes, and a rare thing.
Well, let's move on to My Bodyguard, and I was really interested to see what your take on this movie is. And when I saw it when I was a kid, for some reason it really affected me a lot, and I think one of the reasons was just the kind of realistic portrayal of that age group during that time and school during that time. So I was wondering what your take was on My Bodyguard.
Well, uh, it really hit me, and I didn't remember it well enough. I have a bad memory for plots in the first place. Jazz, my wife, has a wonderful memory for plots. She remembers plots, things she saw years and years ago. I remember people and I remember moments, but I don't remember plot points. And and so especially when Adam Adam Baldwin, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Uh, who I thought was terrific in this film.
Yep.
Really good. When he is getting beaten and beaten and beaten and not reacting, I saw scenes like that growing up. I saw them from the time I was 5. A bunch of kids. The first time I saw it, the kids were between like 4 and 6. Beating a boy who was called the Giant because he was our age, but he was a lot bigger. And obviously it had been drummed into his head that he wasn't supposed to hit anybody smaller. And he kept on saying, I can't hit you because you're smaller than I am. And they got him down on the ground and they were just kicking him. And I was completely, utterly horrified and helpless. It was, I'm not exaggerating, it was one of the worst feelings I ever had in my life. And when I was seeing the bullying in this film, that is real. And adults cannot protect you from it. They're not there. And as satisfying as it is finally see the little guy beat up on a bigger kid, you know, that part of it doesn't, let's put it kindly and say, doesn't usually happen. It certainly didn't happen to me. And you know, it presented a real problem, especially for urban. I didn't grow up suburban, so I can't really say as well. But especially that the movie takes place in Chicago, and even though the kid lives in a fancy hotel, his father is the manager. It's not really a you know, it's not like they own it. And yeah, he's going to a neighborhood school, and it's tough. And it is clearly segregated. I mean, there's the occasional black kid, but it is being Chicago, you know, mostly Polish, Jewish, and the kids are in general peaceable, but the ones who aren't are a little bully clique and merciless. I mean, one of the things that the movie doesn't show, and I was just as glad, is that there's also a high incidence of various kinds of rape in those situations.
Yep.
And it happens to the boys as well as the girls, which is not talked about much in this country. And so there was a sense that I was getting what they call these days a trauma trigger watching it, because all this bullying and all the ways I had to learn how to avoid bullying when I was a kid, because I was rather delicate and I wasn't one of the tough guys. And I finally learned how to fake looking like a tough guy, or a tougher guy than they wanted to mess with. But that took me, you know, I was about 13 before I got that down. Before that, I was just, you know, prey. And so I thought that the film presented that very starkly, and then kind of went Hollywood on it. I didn't mind going Hollywood on it, in the sense of, you know, the comic relief of Ruth Gordon and the power of Adam Baldwin's presence in acting. I really thought he was a unique presence, especially in the film, in the cinema of that time. And how painful it is to see these bullies, because they win and they win and they win, and then finally they lose. But there's a lot of winning, of bullies winning for about the first hour of this hour and 25 minute something picture, and it is very watchable. It kind of gives you all these signals that, don't worry, this is entertainment. But at the same time, what you're seeing is really pretty brutal. And they tread this fine line between realism and Hollywood. I thought they did that as well as it's been done if you have a movie with kids. And again, mostly kids were playing kids. And Alec Baldwin, Adam Baldwin, being so much bigger than the other kids, and probably a little bit older, and you get this sense of his intelligence which later on as an actor, in his roles, he pretty much tried to hide, or was told to hide. But you definitely get the sense of an intelligence working. He's not just brooding. He's not just sulking. He's thinking, and I was very impressed with that. I got impatient with the comedy side of it, Ruth Gordon and all that. Though I have a lot of respect for her as a screenwriter and as an actress when she's properly cast. But it was a movie that got to me. The bullying really, and yeah, that's what happens. And usually, it doesn't have a happy ending. What about you?
Yeah, I agree with you about the Hollywood aspects, especially in the last scene when Chris Makepeace ends up like punching Moody and winning the fight against Moody. But I also I think the film could have been super dark and way too dark if they hadn't
I agree.
had it'd just be almost too dark to watch. I love Ruth Gordon in this movie. I think she's just awesome and like delightful in this movie, and I love that whole character of the hotel manager's crazy mother that keeps getting him into trouble, and I like Martin Mull a lot in it too. I think they both did a really good job. So I don't really I don't really see that as a Hollywoodization of it, but I also kind of think that they had to have like a lightness in this movie, partly because the Lindemann character is so stark, is so like real, and that character, something about that character stuck with me like all my life, and I could recite lines from this movie when I was a kid just after seeing it like twice. There's just something about that whole his whole aspect that is really effective. And you're right. I don't think Adam Baldwin ever had a chance to show that depth. Do you remember Ordinary People very well?
Yep.
He plays.
I don't know about very well, but I remember it.
He plays Timothy Hutton's best friend in that movie, but and when I saw that he was in Ordinary People, I didn't. I was like racking my mind trying to remember who he played in it, and he's totally different in that movie. Like you wouldn't recognize him at all. But it's an interesting thing about that. But yeah, that character and the way that they explore that character, so he there's so many dimensions to him, so many different ways that he has to act, and like right from the start, Adam Baldwin walks into the classroom, he's one guy, then when he's being harassed by Chris Makepeace to be his guardian, he's like kind of another guy. And then those scenes where he's walking through Chicago. This is a great Chicago movie, by the way. I mean, showing parts of Chicago that don't exist anymore at all, and aspects of Chicago and just even urban life during that time that don't exist anymore.
Right.
And the scenes of him walking down the street in those kind of ghetto areas, and the way that he holds his head up and looks at everybody, and I mean that's very real, like that.
Yes.
It's not like you're thinking this is an actor trying to play somebody that lives in this environment. He's very real. He's like fits right into that environment as a kid in that environment, and and those scenes are really I think play a big part in the effectiveness of this movie. And then I
agree. I think the movie would not be anywhere near as effective if you didn't have those scenes of Adam Baldwin walking those streets.
Yeah.
Because it brings the city right to you.
brings his how he fits into that environment right to you
Yes.
too.
Hmm.
And even the scene where Chris Makepeace goes to his actual house and tries to find him and talks to his mother, like just that whoever just that scene with like the lady who plays his mother does a really good job of that role, just in that little
I
tiny
thought the
scene.
teacher did a good job too.
Yeah, the teacher was great too, for sure. Uh, and again, that teacher really exemplifies the kind of woman and the attitude of a woman that age teaching at that particular time. This, I mean, this movie made 7 times more than its budget. It was, I think they spent 3 million on it, and it made 22 million.
Wow,
So it was a really,
that was a lot of money then.
yeah, it was. And can you imagine people going to see this movie now? It would never make it into the theaters. You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
it
Yep.
and the it really struck me the difference between the teenagers then and the teenagers now, um and I could go on and on about that, but there's just this kind of I don't know, just more organic humanity to these kids. um and even like the Joan Cusack character, the girl with the braces, um,
Hmm.
gives this
She was
really,
wonderful.
yeah, she was great. And Jennifer Beals is in it too. Did you see her?
I didn't recognize her at all.
Yeah, she doesn't have any speaking parts, but she's like there in the scenes with the other kids. But
Huh.
yeah, and we're also doing a Matt Dillon double feature again.
Yes, I know.
What did you think of the Matt Dillon character?
I think he did that character well. I think. I think a kid like that, a guy like that, is always trying to make an impression,
Yeah.
and he's always seeing himself through the eyes of people around him. And even though he's a bully precisely because, and this isn't an excuse, but it's the structure of the thing. He's so damned insecure, and when Adam Baldwin tells the little kid whose name you've been talking, and
Chris Makepeace.
Chris Makepeace, hit him in the nose, hit his nose. It's really a good psychological insight because the character Matt Dillon is playing, it's not real to him that he could be harmed. He's terribly afraid of it, but at the same time, it's not real to him. The way he's being in the world, he's being a show-off, he's being a bully, and in the real world, it would be even worse. But yeah, you hit him in the nose. If you do it right, it's going to break his nose, and it's going to affect him. It's going to be this revelation. Now,
he played that fight scene. He played that fight scene really well too. When he gets hit in the nose, he really played that really good.
Yeah, he did that well. He did that very well. In the Over the Edge, when you see him sitting in a chair, first time you see him, and he's quite young and his hair's long. And before he started to move, when it was just a person sitting there, I thought he was a girl.
Yeah.
And then he gets up and he's Matt Dillon, but he's wearing a tank top, which most boys did not wear at that time. I thought that was really strange. But yeah, it was a Matt Dillon double feature, and the more so because though he was a featured player, he wasn't the star. And you got to see different facets of him. When he becomes a star, then the camera's concentrating on his looks, and the camera didn't do that with these movies. You know, the camera concentrated more on his character, the character he was playing. It made me wonder what happened to him, because he completely faded after about the mid-'80s.
Who, Matt Dillon?
Yeah.
No, he didn't. No, his career has been pretty steady the whole time. Yeah.
I didn't know.
I think he started doing movies that he wanted to do. You know, like he got to that level where he could just kind of do whatever he wanted to. So he wasn't in really, like, he was in a few like blockbuster movies that were a couple of comedies, but no, he didn't fade away. He's still out there rocking.
Wow. Okay, yeah. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
I stopped being a film critic.
Yeah.
I guess by 1990, I wasn't a film critic anymore.
Yeah.
And I didn't follow it like that. So that's an excuse for my ignorance, I suppose. But
yeah, I think a lot of those guys that were successful, that, you know, like Jodie Foster we were talking about, and Matt Dillon, it's like they get to a certain place where they don't have to take blockbuster bullshit movies, you know, and the blockbuster movie became so horrible in the 90s too, you know, and so empty. But,
yes.
And I think that him growing up playing in these kind of almost independent movies probably had an effect on him as well. One of the really kind of sad things to me is the career of Chris Makepeace. Because
what career?
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is that he was typecast in this kind of role. Like, I don't know if you ever saw Meatballs, but it was like
nope.
A Bill Murray like camp, sleepaway camp comedy, like teenage comedy in the late 70s. And if you think that Chris Makepeace is a wimp in this movie, he's like a giant wimp in that movie. I mean, his name is like the wuss in that movie. So there was a whole genre of like nebbish triumph movies, you know, like Karate Kid and
yep.
things like that, you know, and he got kind of typecast into that role, and he never was able to make it out of that. But I'm not even sure what he's doing now. But I think he stopped acting around the mid 80s. But
I thought he was very good in this picture, My Bodyguard.
Yeah, he's
I thought,
good.
He played a very believable kid.
Yeah.
His fear was believable, and his gumption was believable. He played a sensitive kid. It was believable. They didn't give him emotions that the character wouldn't have had. And it was clear, you know, he was ripe to be typecast. I mean,
right.
You know, the very smart, little, sensitive, nervy kid. You know, it's very hard to get out of that role.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he's definitely believable in this role, but at least as far as I'm concerned, he wasn't likable. You know, like the whole thing of him, you know, going and talking to the principal and going and talking to his teacher about Lindemann and all that. It's like, dude, come on. You know?
Yeah.
Like, you deserve to get your ass kicked at least once, you know. Like, you need to get beat up at least once, you know.
Yes, really.
Yeah. Was there anything else you wanted to say about the movie?
Uh, I don't think so. Uh, I think these movies were really important to the people who were young and who saw them at the time, and I I'm glad we've been talking about these films. I'd frankly forgotten their existence pretty much, and they bring back a time of transition uh, between, how can I put it, the ripple effect of the Second World War and the onset of the time when pretty soon almost everybody would have a computer of some kind, and after that almost everybody would have a phone, a smartphone that did all this magic stuff that you didn't imagine in 1980. These movies are on that borderline, that where one time is finally fading, the whole effects of the Second World War, and another time is just getting traction. The time we're still in, the prelude to the year 2000. You know, we're still in that centrifugal force of that. And now that time is fading, and there's another thing coming along. But I think these movies that we've been talking about these last 2 weeks are important markers in that transition. To understand that transition, it's helpful to look at the Rumblefish and Ladies and Gentlemen, the Fabulous Stains, Over the Edge, and My Bodyguard. So I'm glad to have had to consider them again.
Yeah, for My Bodyguard, there's a certain calmness to the movie, um, even though it's dealing with these really kind of brutal concepts. There's this underlying calmness to it that I think is of the time,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, there's kind of like a substructure that's there that people are still depending on in their dealings with each other.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. The atomization isn't there as much between people. Yeah.
Yes.
People of differing political beliefs can still talk to each other. But yeah, yeah, it's a good movie. I was thinking next time we could. Would you be into doing Breaking Away?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And I'll think of another movie besides that we can double up on.
Okay.
Okay.
Breaking Away.